Thank you very much. Can you all hear me at the back? I apologize for speaking in English because maybe next time if I come, I'll learn enough Spanish. I want to thank Professor Jaime for inviting me and my wife for this conference. It's a real pleasure and an honor to speak about the work we do at the Goldenson Center for Actuarial Research. And we've already been in Mexico City for 3 days, and we've had a wonderful time. It's a beautiful city, the food is fantastic, the people are great. So thank you for this opportunity. Over the next maybe hour, I'll try to cover these topics. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Goldenson Center for Actuarial Research, some background. I'm going to talk about my role. I'm the director of the center. But the most important topic I'm going to cover a little bit is the applied research philosophy of the Goldenson Center. What we do is, I think, unique enough that I think what we have at the University of Connecticut is different from any university I'm aware of in the US or Canada. So I'll elaborate on it when I get to the section. But since most of you here are students, I also want to spend some time talking about the skill sets and the tools you need to do these kinds of research projects, and you'll be surprised how much of it you already have. Then I'm going to talk about 4 big research projects that we have undertaken at the Goldenson Center. My whole purpose is not to give you an in-depth knowledge of each project, but more to show you the breadth and depth of the work we are doing. And so you'll realize that as actuaries, we can do far more than just traditional actuarial science work. But the other message I want to get to all of you is that you all have the capability of doing these projects with the right amount of supervision and oversight. And then I'm going to make some concluding remarks. Okay, some background about the Goldenson Center. It was formally established in 2009. We were very lucky. We got a big donation from the Goldenson family. Janet and Mark Goldenson, they were the couple who gave us this big donation. Now, the donation doesn't go to me, of course. The donation goes to the Yukon Foundation, but the income from the endowment is the budget I used for the center, and I use that to support students. Now, I don't give the students a lot of money. It's like a stipend, but every student who works on the Goldenson Center project gets a stipend. Now, we have one mission statement for the Goldenson Center, and that is to do applied research projects. And it doesn't have to be pure actuarial. We just say applied research projects to serve the needs of industry, and that's very important. We're not just doing any project, but it has a purpose. And to make sure that we are honest to our mission, what we have is we have an advisory board. And these advisory board members are all key representatives from most of the major insurance companies in the region. And for those who don't know, I'm from Connecticut. That's where the university is. But Hartford, Connecticut is considered the insurance capital of the world, of the US at least, because all the major insurance companies are established in Hartford or the greater Hartford region. Now, the representatives on the advisory board are mainly from the Hartford region, but we also have representatives from Boston, from New York City, from Newark, and even Maine. We have some big insurance companies. So we pretty much cover all the major insurance companies, consulting firms, reinsurers. Now, the only reason I have them on the advisory board, partly to keep me honest, to make sure I'm always doing projects to serve their needs, but it's good marketing because the advisory board members are the ones who give me all the projects for the center, give me as in the Goldenson Center. So what is my role? What do I do? So I'm the director of the center. I would say my main role is I'm the link between industry and the university through the Goldenson Center. So from the background that was described about me, I came from industry. I worked for many years with insurance companies. So I do have a strong link with industry. So they are the ones whom I talk to all the time, and they give me projects. Sometimes they come to me with problems they want to be solved. Sometimes I call them and ask them what issues do you have, and work with them. I'm also a faculty member. So because my main job is managing the center, I just teach one class, actuarial mathematics or life contingencies. So I teach one class. I teach graduate students. So most of my projects, I use graduate students. That doesn't mean I couldn't use undergraduate students. In fact, I have used some undergraduate students. So that's my role. And I have to stay constantly active because, when you work with industry, you realize that they actually have a very short memory. Even if you did a great project for them, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to come back to you with another project. So my job is to constantly market the Goldenson Center. That's my main job. And I have a small marketing team, actually, but all students. So these students help me, to advertise the center. And in fact, when I go back to the US on September 11th, we're having our annual advisory board meeting. And it's just, to share with the advisory board members all the projects we have done in the past year, some of which I'll be talking about today. Okay, this is important. What is our research philosophy, and why is our philosophy so different? I think that it makes us unique, as I said, in the US, in Canada, and I've never yet met a university in actuarial science which follows exactly this philosophy. So I told you our mission statement was to do applied research projects to serve the needs of industry. So that's very important in the sense that these applied projects, I don't dream them up sitting at the university. It comes from industry. These are real problems that they need to be solved. So now sometimes I may initiate the problem because I've got a lot of industry experience, but at the end of the day, there's not a single problem a project we do at the Goldenson Center which isn't needed. And it's not even exploratory research. Whatever work we do can be immediately applied. In fact, that's what the company wants us to do. So in one level, it's like consulting, because you're doing something that a company needs right away. But it's still a little bit different because we do lots more in-depth analysis. But the fact that it has to be immediately applicable, it means that you're not just giving the company a report or a paper. If there are certain tools they need, like software tools, you provide them. So it has to be something that from start to finish. So it's very important because our end result is to serve the needs of industry. Now, what's interesting is that many of the research projects we do have financial ramifications or benefits for the company by using whatever models we develop. It helps them, obviously. But many of these projects also become the basis for PhD research for my PhD students. So I have 4 PhD students, and all my previous PhD students, they all worked, the work they started off with came from a Goldenson Center project, but many of these projects have sort of theoretical aspects that it's easy to become a PhD research. Now, what's nice about this kind of PhD research, it makes the students, when they do this research, very, very marketable. In fact, any student who works on a Goldenson Center project is very marketable because they're not just doing academic research on a theoretical problem. It's a real problem, and they're putting a little more rigor than companies are using, so they become very, very marketable. So many of my students who have PhDs, who get their PhD under me, they get jobs in industry. Some of them, of course, can also get jobs in academia. And when I go through some of the research projects, you'll understand what I mean about being big with theoretical aspects. Okay, now this is important for all the students. what tools do you need to do most of these projects? Now, remember, none of my students, with the bulk of my students, have no industry experience. I mean, they are just like all of you. They are I mean, they are willing to learn, and they can pick up things very quickly. Most of the projects use Excel, good Excel skills. VBA is a plus, but good use of macros. One software we use a lot when we're dealing with a lot of data is R, and I spoke with Professor Jaime, and he said, all of you guys are familiar with R, that's very good. Sometimes we use SAS, but it's not necessary, because R, of course, is free, and many of the companies we do work for also use R. So, so when we actually finally develop the models, we can give them the code because they can directly use it. The second bullet is very important also. I think I talked to one of the students here, and he said they actually do Monte Carlo simulations. Monte Carlo is, this is where you move a little bit from what you learn in the classroom in say, actual mathematics. How many of you have taken actual mathematics? Just show of hands. Oh, good. Okay, so you'll know what I'm going to be saying. So much of what you study is like pricing, reserving, and you do this actual present value of benefits, less actual present value of obligations or premiums. But when you do that, you come up with a single number, right? That's what we call a deterministic approach. But in real life, when companies are doing, whether it's reserving or capital, they want to see the full distribution of outcomes. And they might be interested in asking a question like, how much reserves should I hold to be 85% certain that I can cover all my obligations? So to do that, you have to generate a distribution of outcomes. And the best way of doing it is Monte Carlo simulations, because it's much better than creating some kind of an analytical model. So Monte Carlo simulations, all you need to do is, you can do it in R, but you need to take a random number generator, generate a number between 0 and 1. If it falls between 0 and say 0.1, the person is supposed to die. If it falls between 0.1 and 1, the person is supposed to live. And you can make it more complicated. But being familiar with Monte Carlo simulations, in many projects that we do, the students have to generate Monte Carlo simulation models. We call it stochastic models, so it's sort of the same word we use. Fundamental actuarial knowledge and statistics. Statistics is another powerful tool that we use a lot, whether it's predictive modeling, regression analysis, and it's great that your department and the statistics department are all part of the same school. That's a big help, and you've got a lot of professors and whom you can talk to. So statistics, good actual science, this discounting with interest and survivorship or contingent cash flows, that's all very fundamental in a lot of the work we do, stuff that you study in school. Good communication skills. Now, just to let you know, most of my students in the graduate school, in fact, all my PhD students are international students, and English is not their native language, but they do all the communication with the client, and they learn to talk to the client directly, write reports. Of course, I'm behind the scenes doing some corrections, but I still give them all the exposure. The big difference between doing a Goldenson Center project and say doing a classroom project is client focus. And that's a very, the term itself doesn't explain anything. But what's interesting is that many times as a student, you sort of know what the right answer is or how to do it, and you're obviously going to be doing it that way and sharing it with the client. But the client might have different needs, different expectations. It may not even be exactly what you think should be what you should be doing, but you have to adjust, adapt. Because at the end of the day, you are working for the client when you do a Goldenson Center project. So having a client focus is very critical. In the way we do it at the Goldenson Center, we have weekly calls with the client when we start a project. And the students are there for every call. They talk directly with the client. So when we do some work, we share it with the client comes back and says, well, we prefer it this way or whatever, and the students learn how to adapt. So client focus is very critical. And of course, in every project we work on, we work in a team environment. So it's not one student working on one project. typically I have as many as 6 or 7 students on a project. Now, maybe I can do the project with 2 students, 2 good students, but I always have more students, so more students can learn what it is like to work on real-life projects. And students learn from each other, which is what I love. Okay, so far it's all abstract talk. Let me give you into something specific. I'll go through some projects that we've done. And the point I want to make to all of you is how varied these projects are, how different, but they all actuaries are capable of doing this project. So this first one is actually very interesting. I would almost say this could have been done by someone in statistics, just statistics, without any actual science background. This is called, we call it replicated stratified sampling, or RSS for short. Now, what led to this project? Well, in the US, some of the insurance companies, their modeling is extremely complicated. It's complicated because they're always doing stochastic models, but they have a lot of data. I mean, like some of the big insurance companies, they may have maybe 1 million policy holders, and you're simulating, over many, many years, cash flows. So you can do the whole analysis and come up with an answer, but it might take you hours, if not days, to come up with an answer. Now, for the actuary, it's okay, they're doing a fancy model and they're producing numbers, but imagine if you're the CEO of an insurance company. Well, you want to get answers very quickly. Now, it may not be easy, but if you can get quick answers, but even then, you may not even be interested in just one answer. Most times, when you are in management, you want to, we call it sensitivity analysis or what-if analysis. You want to say, well, you've made these assumptions. Suppose something else happens. What would happen? So you can't tell your CEO or your CFO, well, in 3 days' time, I'll come back with another answer. So how do you speed up the modeling process? But it also has to be accurate, so you just can't make it fast and not accurate. So just my background is in statistics, so I almost went back to something very basic in statistics, which is sampling. We all know in statistics, you never analyze the entire population. You take a sample, and you look at the sample, and you make inferences about the population, right? That's very basic statistics. So that wasn't that big a deal. But interestingly enough, actuaries rarely, if they never use sampling techniques because they have access to the entire population. What is the population for most of financial modeling? It's data. It resides in some database, so it's very easy to get access to it. So it's not like non-financial applications where the population is typically something unknown and you cannot see the entire population. So actuaries have not used sampling techniques before. So this is called replicated stratified sampling. So the sampling is stratified sampling. So where does the replication come from? Now, this is where it was new in statistics. So statisticians, when they have to do any kind of analysis, they take a sample, right? My wife is, in education, they often deal with sampling students or whatever and teaching methods. So if you take a sample of even 100 students and you do your analysis, now if I told you take another sample of 100 students or take 50 samples of 100 students, that is impractical. It takes too much work, effort, time, money. But when you're working on financial modeling, if I took a random sample of, say, 50 policies from a database of 1 million policies, that's no big deal. You just have to, do a good program to actually extract the 50 policies. Now I told you to extract another set of 50 policies, no big deal. You can always do that. It doesn't take time or effort or money. So this is called replicated stratified sampling, and that's where it became different from a statistics application, because statistics deals with a single sample, and then they may do things like bootstrapping, but that's still dealing with the same sample and creating additional samples. Here we get new samples. And so what happens is that you can now combine the samples and get a much richer estimate. So that's called replicated stratified sampling. Now what we were analyzing is sensitivity analysis. Like you have a base run, like a reserve or a calculation. We want to see what are the changes to your base run if you change your assumption. So the whole purpose of this RSS technique was to capture what I would say changes in assumptions. So you can better understand this from this diagram. So at the very top, you have this underlying population. So that could be, say, 1 million policies, that a company has. You break it up into groups, and the groupings are usually nothing spectacular, maybe by age, by insurance plan, or gender, or whatever. So you form groups. Let's say you form 50 groups, for example. Now, I draw a sample from each group. So that's why it's called stratified sampling. So let's say I draw one policy from each group, so I end up with 50 policies. They enter into what I call is a batch file. Now what I do then, instead of 1 million policies, with these 50 policies, I do a baseline run, and I do all the sensitivity analysis on these 50 policies. And I get a whole bunch of answers, and they go into my so-called RSS processor. I repeat the whole process with another set of samples, and then I combine it all together. So anyway, this was almost like a statistics technique, but its applications were huge in insurance. So some of the good things is a classic Goldenson Center project. When you come up with an idea like this, you knew there was a need that was going to be satisfied, but we weren't sure that it was going to work. So of course the students were there to help me run all kinds of different tests and everything. And it's all using Excel and VBA, not anything fancy, but applying it for different insurance applications. This particular research has got 2 US patents. So it's right now under my name, so it's owned by the Goldenson Center as well. We had all these great articles in Wall Street Journal and stuff. So it got a lot of publicity because it was a very clever use of statistics and a variation of statistics because of the replication process. So this is really an example of really nice theoretical research, because I had a PhD student who did a PhD on this topic. She made some theoretical assumptions and showed why this approach converges and all that. So, first example. So next example, very different. Completely different techniques, different tools. In fact, I would say it's more economics-based than statistics-based. And this is, we call it the National Retirement Sustainability Index. So this is going to be published every year by the Goldenson Center. So what is this index? Okay, it's a number from 0 to 100. The closer it is to 100, the more sustainable your retirement. The closer it is to 0, the less sustainable your retirement. Now, it's not a new concept. There are lots of retirement indexes or indices in the US. It's all for the US right now. Certainly can be applied to Mexico, I can assure you, but there are lots of other indices. And Boston College has a very famous index called, I think they call it a Retirement Readiness Index. But what made our index different? And again, remember, our job was not to do something different just to be different. We wanted to do something different that he felt had more value. And how did we know it was going to have more value? We had 2 board members who came to me after one of our board meetings and said, Jay, you guys do all this creative work. We have a problem with the current indices. They're all based on economic statistics, which is how most people do any kind of economic index. So what you do is, for the entire population, so this is done on a macro level, you project, income for the entire population at retirement, and then you look at what kind of income you need to have a sustainable retirement. If the amount of assets you project is less than the liabilities or your obligations at retirement, that's inadequate. If it's more, that's adequate. And of course, you can normalize it. But it's all based on economic statistics. So where we were different is we brought in non-economic factors. Now, the question is, why non-economic factors? Well, I'll give you a simple example. 2 people retiring, one is in good health, one is in poor health. Same amount of assets. Well, clearly someone in good health will not just probably have a more enjoyable retirement life, but their healthcare expenses at retirement will be much less than someone who health is poor. Another big non-economic factor we captured was adaptability. So how did we define adaptability and how did we model it? Adaptability is how capable are you to earn additional income after you retire? So like myself, I'm a professor. I mean, I don't ever have to retire. If I retire and I suddenly find I don't have enough money, I can work part-time, teach at a community college. I'm adaptable. But if you had one skill that pretty much went away when you stop working, you're not adaptable. And what drives adaptability? Education and training. So we had to, the thing that made this project so complicated was, the idea was great, bring in non-economic factors, but how do you model it? It's like adaptability. So we had to find proxies, use a lot of common sense. I had all these great discussions with my students to give me some ideas, because I didn't have all the answers myself. But at the end of the day, we came up with this index. It took more than a year to develop this. This, by the way, we didn't get funding from the companies. We did it on our own, but we had support from the companies. But this has led to a whole bunch of other things. So after we completed this project, we gave the results to everybody. We didn't charge for it, but it was good publicity for the Goldenson Center. So just to show you, before I do that, what kind of skills we required? We needed students to be able to access the internet, to get public databases, like we have the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I'm sure you have similar public databases in Mexico. So, it's access to existing databases. Most of the modeling work, we use Excel, simple linear regression to come up with the answers. But, learning how to be logical and work with a lot of data. And, of course, basic actual math. So just show you some of the results, okay? This is just a snapshot. So the big message we tried to give in this project was that, all the existing indices, they tend to be very correlated with the economic conditions at the time. So like in the US, when we had this financial crisis, the Boston College Index looked horrible. And then, when the economy is good, the index looks good. Now, we see that pattern in the base index. So the base index is purely economics driven. So you'll see that the base index, so if you think of the index as a number between 0 to 100, and the index is, say, 50%, that means your standard of living at retirement is 50% less than what you desire. Kind of think of it that way. So you notice that the baseline index is, not that good, right? Overall, it's 43. We separate it for the working population and the retired population. But then when you start to add these non-economic factors, look at the very end. 81%, 77%, overall 81%. So there's a big gap between the base index and the final index. But the message here is very powerful. It says things like, yes, when the economy is bad, things are not going to be good for everybody, but there are a lot of things you can do as individuals to help you have a more sustainable retirement. So things like educating yourself, training yourself, staying in good health, planning, financial planning, those are all big drivers. The insurance companies loved it because, like financial planning, for example, who produces financial planning services? Insurance companies. So this was a message of hope. So it was a very, and it took a lot of work, but very useful. Now this next one is completely different. And I would say this is possibly my favorite project, my favorite topic. This is enterprise risk management for small businesses. Now you all study as actuaries, risk management. Everyone uses the word risk management. There are a lot of risk management books. I think in the US you can get a PhD in risk management. So risk management is what I call a buzzword that's very common in the world of actuaries. But if you look at all the books on risk management and all the work being done on risk management, the focus is always on large corporations. One obvious reason is because large corporations are willing to pay for it. So you have large corporations, they have a chief risk officer. That's like a required position. So the point is that so much of attention is given to large corporations, but there's nothing being done for small businesses. So I said, let me look into it because, I have my own research center. Now, the problem when you're dealing with small businesses is small businesses are not, they're so varied. Every small business is unique. So it's not easy to talk about risk management for small businesses. But most of the work we do at the Goldenson Center, when we start, we don't know what we're doing either. But, we push along and we figure it out as we go along. So, so when I did this was when the center was first started. This was probably my first project I started on. I use students, obviously. That's my resource base. And the students were paid their little stipend. And they worked for a lot of the small businesses around the university, and they did a risk management project in a team. The companies or the businesses never paid for it. It was free. So, of course, they didn't say no. But they really liked the work we were doing. It helped them a lot. And the students gave them a full report and gave them, any tools they needed. Simple. And there I used a lot of undergraduates, just to let you know, because you didn't require strong, say, actuarial skills, but very, very useful. But more importantly, this got a lot of publicity for the center. It was done for free. Good PR. Several of my students presented at actuarial conferences. We were interviewed by, I don't know where they have it here, but we call it National Public Radio or NPR. It's a good radio station. And so my students and myself, we were interviewed by NPR. So we got wonderful publicity. But I wrote an article because I always like to publish something which I think is useful. I wrote it in Contingencies magazine. But more importantly, this has finally led to a book on enterprise risk management for small and medium-sized enterprises. I am the editor of the book. I wrote a couple of chapters, but we have authors from all over the country. So this is the first book written on ERM for small businesses. So I love this particular project, but I think it's extremely useful, and it cuts across every country, because every country I know, the small businesses are the fastest growing, and they make up the economy, but they also have the highest failure rate. So it's very, very useful if you can work in this area or build some expertise. Let me just see, I'm jumping a little bit ahead. Okay. Sorry, I didn't move that. Okay, hopefully you heard me. Okay, so I was talking about this, very successful, this ERM for small businesses. And we've got this book, so it's published by the Society of Actuaries, by the way, so hopefully it's going to get a lot of publicity in the actual profession. So, okay, now this is interesting. So remember I told you the NRSI, the national index that we developed, no one paid us for it. But we share those results to the entire industry. But sometimes you do certain research, you give it away for free, but it leads to paying projects. So the NRSI led to this project, because what we did was we did a national index for the entire country, but you could also create what's called an individual retirement sustainability index for an individual. Now the advantage when you're working with an individual, you really have more information, because when we're dealing with the whole country, we had to use aggregate data. So this is like an individual financial planning model. And again, it's not unique. There are individual financial planning models. Every major insurance company has financial planning models, but what made it different? Number one, we had these non-economic factors which we could incorporate, but we always try to do something different. And this, by the way, this has been totally sponsored by a major insurance company, and they love the work being done at the Goldenson Center, and they want us to continue doing more and more work for them. So this is a very, in fact, we're still working on it. I mean, we've got most of it done. So another reason it was unique was we did this as a lifetime financial planning model. So lifetime means you're working today, we're trying to come up with a strategy, a financial planning strategy that will take you from today until you die. So that means it could go from the pre-retirement to the post-retirement stage. So that is unique because most financial planning models are either pre-retirement or just post-retirement. So post-retirement is after you retire, pre-retirement is before you retire. But to combine the two stages, it's useful and valuable, but it's difficult. And the other thing we try to do is, because now this is an individual planning model, we try to incorporate what we call financial dependency. So the strategy for a single 30-year-old versus a 30-year-old married with a family, dependents, owning a house, it's a different strategy. So we had to capture all of that. So it's a major project. So if you look at this chart here, the pre-stage and the post-stage are very different. The products you need to help you in your financial strategy at the pre-stage, well, what concerns most people when they're young and they're working? Well, that is premature death. That's like one fear, you know, it can happen. And for that you have life insurance, term insurance, whole life insurance. So those would be the mitigating products. Premature disability, because if you get disabled, you suddenly lose your ability to work. So you have disability income products. Health insurance in the US, health insurance is important. So you buy health insurance to cover healthcare expenses at the pre-retirement stage. And of course, the other big thing is that you make it to retirement and you don't have enough money. So that's insufficient assets at retirement. And you also have products like investments to help you manage that. So you have different combinations of products at the pre-retirement stage. Now with the post-retirement stage, you also have risks, but they're not exactly the same, or they may have different level of importance. So like one big risk at retirement is longevity risk. And you know, longevity risk is very interesting because most people think that if you have enough money at retirement to cover you until life expectancy, you should be okay. So if you're a 65-year-old, I don't know, tables to say maybe it's 20 years, so you have enough money to cover you for 20 years, you should be okay. But for any of you who study actuarial science, you'll know that life expectancy is an expected value of a future lifetime random variable. So it's roughly a 50-50 chance that you could live beyond your life expectancy or before your life expectancy. So we have to capture, to cover yourself, the longevity risk, you have to capture beyond your life expectancy. So investments is obviously one source, but sometimes you run out of investment. So you have immediate annuities. And then there's a very interesting product we have here. It's called deferred immediate annuity. So the income kicks in after your life expectancy. So you're 65-year-old, when you're 85, then the benefit comes in. So you combine the deferred annuity, the immediate annuity, and investments, and that covers your longevity risk. Then, of course, prolonged illness is a big issue in the US, and we have long-term care, critical illness products. And then finally, we have something called, we call it bequest needs. So most people, parents, when they retire, they want to make sure that when they die, they leave something behind for their loved ones. So that's called bequest needs, and whole life insurance is a good source for that. So the point about sharing you this is that you're trying to come up with an optimization or an optimal strategy that carries you from the pre all the way through the post. But it's a two-step optimization because the products and the techniques at the pre-stage is different from the products and the techniques at the post-stage. So, it's complex. So even without going through the detail, let me just mention the way this had to be done using Monte Carlo simulations. You couldn't do this deterministically. And we actually did a combination, Monte Carlo, which most of you know. We also use something called Markov chains, because what makes this a bit unique is that at every stage you have many decrements that could get you off. So for example, at the start of the year, you could be alive, you could be disabled, or you could be dead, right? Those three situations. Now from each stage in the coming year, the person's alive could get disabled, person's alive could stay alive, the person's alive could die. So you have this what we call transition probability. So when you study Markov chains, it's a very basic, it's non-homogeneous because the probabilities vary each year. So the students had to incorporate that into their simulation. So we call this Monte Carlo Markov chain model, MCMC model. So the client loved it. You know, just interesting. The company is a huge insurance company. They have competent actuaries there, but no one has the time to build a model this sophisticated except students and universities. So this was a huge thing for them when we helped do this model. So remember, at the end of the day, wasn't just doing the modeling. We had to come up with this individual index. We call it the Individual Financial Wellness Index. And we had to come up with an optimal strategy. So we had to tell the financial planner that, look, for a 30-year-old with a mortgage, with a wife and 3 kids, and they can save $20,000 a year, here's how they should allocate their money from now until retirement. When they come to retirement, here's how they should allocate their retirement. That was the answer we had to give. So coming up with the model was the first problem. Coming up with an optimal solution, now that was another interesting problem. So I just let you know that I'm showing you the end result, but it took a lot of discussions, and it's not all my ideas. I sit with students, and the students come up with a lot of the ideas themselves because they are actually doing the models. So we had a lot of back and forth. I think what we came up with was very unique. So whenever you're creating an index, you have to first create like an upper bound and a lower bound. So our lower bound is 0, the upper bound is 100. So what does 0 mean? Well, 0 means that you just have no money to live on, basically. It doesn't mean you have no money at all, but you can't meet your basic needs. And what does 100 mean? 100 is interesting because 100 doesn't mean you got 0 probability of ever being ruined. 100 is you've got enough money or you've saved enough money that there's a very, very strong chance. And how strong is strong? We maybe make a 1%, 2% kind of a ruin probability. So once we established the 0 and 100, then we ran our specific model and try to find out how does it fit relative to the 0-100 scale and gave it a number. So remember, again, it's an optimization problem. So first we had to establish what we call the ideal budget. How much should you save to get this 100 criteria? Okay, so we established that. Now, obviously, most normal people cannot save that kind of money. So maybe we say, if you're willing to save $50,000 a year, you'll be very happy, all throughout your life. You'll have enough money, to survive. But the person says, I only got $20,000. What can I do? So how do you take $20,000 and tell you what's the best thing you can do with $20,000 so that you can maximize your index? It won't be 100, but we want to think of the best way to do it. So remember, it's very hard when you're doing this through Monte Carlo simulation. So we didn't want to do this exhaustively and run every possible situation, every possible combination. So we did a very clever approach. We called it a marginal approach. We started off with the ideal budget. We measured how good something is using a ruin probability. And ruin probability is when you make it and you don't have enough money. And we define what is not enough money. We minimize the ruin probability. So what we did, we went to all the different allocations at the ideal budget, brought it down, say, one section by $100, and found out which was the product we could reduce $100 and has the least impact on the ruin probability. So it is done in a very systematic way, a big loop in R, to solve this problem. So we came up with an optimal strategy. So the client was very happy. But now, this is where the problem became really interesting. Okay, so think of it, right? And remember I told you early on, it's very important to meet the needs of the client. So you can't tell the client, hey, look, we had the greatest minds, we had statisticians involved in this product, we are using Monte Carlo Markov chain simulation. You couldn't do better than this. Here it is. Pay us. So we couldn't do it that way, right? So the client said, it's a great model, but we can't use it because it's too complicated. It takes too long to run these simulations. And this model we are doing was going to be fitting into, the client has also dealt with a vendor, and they had a financial planning platform which had the input and output. Ours was the engine that did the calculation. And the platform they had purchased couldn't use a stochastic model or Monte Carlo model. So what they wanted us to do is to come up with an analytical solution. So back to like a deterministic approach. So how do you come up with an analytical solution for something so complicated? So what we did was we did a reverse generalized linear model, which is very interesting. And this, by the way, is a technique they use in statistics, but apparently I wasn't aware of it. So what we did was we have a model. We have no data. We created data by generating model points. So we ran many, many situations and got, say 1,000 data points. Then we knew the output. The output was the optimal budget, the allocation. So the output was not a single number. It was a small little vector of numbers, how to allocate it amongst the different products. And we did a generalized linear model fit. And it still wasn't as simple as that. Even after we fitted the model, we had to make sure that the model was, what's the word to use? It was logical. So for example, when you have all the independent variables, and of course the dependent variables is what we were trying to get, you want to make sure that the coefficients of the independent variables are in the right direction. You cannot have someone with a bigger budget having, you can't have a negative coefficient for the budget, because you have more money, you should do better. So we had to make sure that the coefficients are correct. So anyway, we had to back and forth. We finally came up with an analytical model, and now this is like a classic user interface that we provide to the client. It's all done in Excel. It's a little bit more complicated than that, actually. But I had another team of students who built the Excel model. So I had the R model done by one group, another group doing this, but all knew what each other was doing, actually. Okay, so for this particular project, I think it required, again, skills that you all might actually have, or you could pick up. And by the way, just to let you know, is that when I start a project, no one student has all the skills, but collectively they do. So they learn from each other. My resources as students, I can't get students who have all these skills, but they learn from each other. So many of the students who started this project, some didn't even know R, but they learned from each other. So this one required R, good modeling skills, Excel, VBA, of course, basic actual math. So I hope I haven't taken too much of your time, but let me conclude, okay? So I hope maybe the takeaway for all of you, especially the students, is that actuarial students are capable of doing lots more than you might even realize. You might not even be aware the tools that you study and the techniques you learn, how applicable it is. But you can work on real interesting projects from industry, which have theoretical aspects to it. And I'll tell you, every student who works on a Goldenson Center project gets a job in industry, because they're very marketable. So that's another reason I get a lot of students wanting to work on these projects. And many of them are international students, so you know how it's very difficult for international students to get jobs in the US. So they have to be extremely good, and this is what makes them so good. So I have been talking with Professor Jaime, and I would very much, I'm free, obviously, after this talk, to talk to you guys, anyone, about how maybe something like this can be implemented at UNAM University, because I think any university is capable of doing this, and you have far more students than we have, so I think you can do it. So I'll stop here, and if there are any questions, let me know. contact information.